Like the title of the video says, we're going to be covering Zephyr's first ability, Tailwind. So Tailwind kind of suffers from being kind of an amalgamation of a lot of different changes over time, different concepts, including its augment. And basically what that's kind of done is it's made it a skill that kind of lives in two distinct areas that don't really meet up well, and that would be mobility and damage. So this does have a damaging component, and it also has a mobility component. The damaging component is not very good. The mobility component can be. So let's go ahead and jump into stats and take a look and see what all of this means. So from the ground, you charge and release to launch Zephyr into an airborne hover. We'll call this hover jump. From the air, tap to dash forward. We'll call this dash, or aim down to dive bomb enemies below. Then we have a bunch of stats. So let's go ahead and take a look at all three modes that we have. Alright, so whenever you are on the ground and you hold down the ability, you will immediately begin charging. During this time you cannot shoot, you cannot roll, you cannot slide, you can't move at all, you just channel. It does require both hands, so you're basically crowd controlled during this. It kind of looks cool, but yeah, it's right off the bat it's not super effective. And then you're going to launch up and hover in the air. Now once you reach the apex of your jump, you're going to start hovering. This lasts for 10 seconds. So once 10 seconds have occurred, you will begin falling back down. Now this only occurs when you're on the ground and you hold the button. Now the other version of the skill is in the air. If you aim at the ground and use it, you will dive bomb. This is very similar to how a melee slam attack works. It is kind of just a worse version of melee slam, almost always. And we're going to talk about how the damage component works a little bit later, and how you can try to maximize it. But the final version of the skill is basically when you're aiming anywhere except downwards, and you just tap the button. You will launch yourself into a dash. Keep in mind, every single time you dash, your bullet your aim, your bullet, what would you even call it? Your aiming fall speed thing is reset. So if I do this again, I can aim again and slow fall. Oop, go up, do it. So yeah, every single time you dash, it will reset that. However, it does not reset your jump. So you do not ever get a third jump from this ability. I think that would actually be a really nice addition to it, just in general, but that's not how it currently works. So one final thing to note with how the mechanics of the skill work are, I'm going to go ahead and show you. If I dash straight up, it is going to cost me 25 energy, so keep an eye on that energy. Now if I dash while I'm in the air already, it isn't going to cost me 25, it's going to cost me 12.5. And that is because this skill actually has a modifier that whenever you are airborne, it costs 50% less base energy. Now it is base energy, so it is not additive with efficiency, it is multiplicative. So that doesn't mean if you get 50% efficiency that this thing is just free to cast. It will be very, very cheap though. So that is sort of a nice little quality of life feature of the skill. So let's go ahead and take a look at all of the stats that it has, and then we're going to talk about how the ability scales with stats. After that, we're going to cover the augment and how to get the most out of damage when it's possible, and I think that'll pretty much cover it for the skill. So let's go ahead and take a look. So we have it says Tailwind and it says Dive Bomb. So it only shows two distinct versions of the skill here. We do have a dash as well, but this is fine. So we have a jump, 2.5 meters to 12.5 meters. So 2.5 meters is the base amount. This does not increase or decrease with stats at all. That 2.5 meters will always be at least 2.5 meters and at most 2.5 meters. But the 12.5, that one can increase and decrease. That is our hover jump height. So how high we jump in the air when we do our hover jump. Now this ability is really unintuitive with how it works and how it scales with stats. So Jump doesn't actually scale with range at all. Ability range doesn't affect this skill really almost at all unless you're going for damage. So, the jump actually scales with duration. So the way it works is pretty much all of the versions of the dash are about the same duration. They don't really scale that much. They don't really seem to scale with duration at all in terms of how long they last. But the intensity of the dash is affected by duration. So you will dash the same time, but you will dash faster. So whenever you do your hover jump, you will jump way up in the air if you have increased ability duration. This can go up to like 30 or something. You get very, very high. Air range, and you also see radius, and then you see dive bomb radius down there. Those are going to be scaling your damage components. So whenever you take off from the ground, you will deal damage around you. Whenever you dash towards something, you will deal damage around you. And then whenever you dive bomb, you will deal damage in an area. So those meters right there do scale off of ability range, but you'll come to see there's some quirkiness to where and how exactly all of that's applied on some of the versions of the skill. And then we have airspeed. Airspeed, that is how fast you dash. So right now it's 30 meters per second. And this is, I think this is very similar like Wukong's Cloud Walk, except way less controllable. So having, been the airframe, since the beginning, she has a very, very uncontrollable mobility skill, which doesn't make a lot of sense for someone who can control the wind. But it is 30 meters and it scales with ability duration. So you can very easily get this thing up to, 75 meters per second. If you do so, you are going to be moving very, very quickly and go a very long way. Now, this is good for open world scenarios. It is not at all that good for indoor scenarios, and we'll talk about a little bit more about that in a second. Finally, we have the damage components. Now, the only thing I'm going to mention right this second is that the Tailwind version of the skill has slashing type damage, and the dive bomb has impact damage. So neither of these really proc their statuses, so they don't really slash or proc impact. However, they do knock down, so they are all guaranteed to knock down when they're used. So let's go ahead and take a look at sort of how all of this interacts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on some ability duration. So I'm just going to throw this on. We're going to take a look at the card real quick, and we're going to see that our jump went up, our airspeed went up, our range, our damage, none of that changed, and we're going to do our hover jump into the air. So you can see we are quite a bit higher than we were before. However, this hover jump duration is still 10 seconds. It is still 10 seconds. It cannot be increased with ability duration. So you will hover up there always for 10 seconds unless you don't fully charge this ability. So that is one of the kind of weird quirks about it, is that depending on how long you've held down this ability, you will have a percentage of the height and hover time. So this would be like 5 seconds and half as high, right? So let me go ahead and throw on our other range mod, or sorry, our other duration mod. See, it just doesn't make sense. And then we're going to do our full charge up and jump. And you're going to see we are very, very high to the point of impracticality. Almost no rooms are this big, so whenever you're doing this, you're probably going to want to be inside an open world environment, Plains of Eidolon or Ballast, etc. So yeah, it's very impractical for indoors. One nice thing that they did change for indoors though, some of the older Zephyr players will probably remember this. If you dash into a wall, you would just dash into it for the full duration of your dash. So effectively you would dash, and see, the entire time she was aiming forward, I would just be launching myself into that wall. They actually did change this so that whenever you make contact with something, I think it's like 0.25 seconds later, you will stop dashing. So right there, and you see that I stopped dashing. However, you do maintain momentum. So I'm going to try to clip this just so I'll stop dashing. but you'll see I still fly really fast past it. Really fast past it. So it is very clunky to use even still, even with all of the quality of life things that they've kind of added to it. I think in the end, this skill is probably going to need a rework just because it's not good for most of the content in the game. It is very good for open world, but now that we have Arcwing launchers, that doesn't super matter. Now, that being said, you can get from point A to point B faster than an Arcwing launcher sometimes, depending on the distance, because you don't have to pull anything out. And you do dash a very long way when you have a lot of duration. So it is a very, very long way, and pretty quickly too. So as a mobility skill, this is great in open environments, or if you're trying to jump across a big giant room. You can activate it in the air to sort of aim, and it's kind of hard at this duration, but I can definitely turn around and do it again, or dive bomb to try to control it. But when you're at high duration, it's going to be really, really hard to control. So that's how it scales with duration. Now with range, as you noticed, when we put on the negative range, it didn't actually really change anything for our speeds. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Our jump is the same, our airspeed is the same, our jump duration, you don't see it here, but it is also the same. So what does it really affect? Well, it basically affects these damaging components, dive bombs radius, air jumps radius, stuff like that. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. So I'm going to spawn some heavy gunners here, and I'm going to come over here. Oh, I really should pause them because I don't have any defense on. Oops. Pause, invincibility, there we go, sorry about that. We're going to come back over here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my hover jump first. So whenever you take off, you will actually deal a small amount of damage and knock all the enemies nearby down. This is a slash damage, but it doesn't do slash proc. Now, they all fall down, so it's a knockdown. I think that's okay for given the nature of the skill. And then dive bomb does impact damage, so you'll notice the damage is a little bit different there. But there's actually two reasons why that is. And then we also have our dash. Now the dash is where it gets kind of finicky a little bit. So if I am standing somewhat behind some enemies or in front, doesn't super matter, just away from them, and then I dash, you're gonna see they all get knocked down. You notice it's 2 meters, well 3.5 meters with our range. It's not a lot, right? It's not a super big amount. However, if you do it from back here and you dash past them, it doesn't do anything to them. So from what I can tell with the dash is somewhere in front of you, it calculates a distance that it should do like an explosion for damage whenever you dash. And you may or may not see, I hit the back ones but not the front ones. You may or may not hit enemies with this. It's really inconsistent. Generally, if you're like right here, you're gonna hit, right? So it may not even be like a bubble. It may actually be more like a cone. But it doesn't go the entire duration, the entire length of your dash at all. And it's a little weird too, because if you're right on top of somebody, so let me go ahead and do that, it doesn't do anything at all. So it's a little weird. Oh, that time it did. I'm not 100% sure why this happens sometimes, but yeah, if you're next to something, sometimes the hit box, the damage component doesn't generate somehow. I don't really understand how it's coded, because I can't visually see what's happening, but yeah, it's not good. It's a very clunky skill, at least in terms of damage. I think it's okay as a mobility skill right now, but in terms of damage, you're just going to see over and over and over that it's not really great. So yeah, our takeoff is slash, this one, and our slam is impact. Our dash is also slash, so that is also slash type damage. The final component to how the skill works in terms of damaging, let me go ahead and go over here. And if the screen looks really jerky, I'm sorry, I think my mouse is starting to go. We're going to actually notice this is a pretty cool quality of life thing, but I think it's just implemented a little poorly. So, what is the base damage of dive bomb against these enemies? that is the wrong skill. So we're going to ignore that. So let's go ahead and do this. I think it said 13. I want to say that was 13. Yeah, 13 damage. Alright, now if I jump higher in the air and slam, that was 42, I want to say. That was 79. That was 44, I want to say. So effectively the way it works is the higher you are in the air, the more damage Dive Bomb will deal. Now this is only for Dive Bomb. It does deal quite a bit more damage. So the way the calculation works is you will deal 20% more damage for every meter you are above the ground. Now, there is sort of a grace period of 5 meters. So if you are within 5 meters of the ground, you will always do at least 100% damage. But everything above that, you will deal 20% more damage for every single meter. So what does that mean? Well, if I'm, 100 meters in the air, you're talking about a lot of damage increase. However, and you're probably already thinking this, there's not a lot of verticality to maps unless you're in an open world environment. And even then, how often are you going to dash way up in the air just to dash way back down? It's really impractical. It's going to be very slow for how the game plays. And, I could just, pull out a weapon and effectively deal with these guys way faster than using my ability to do so. So finally, let's talk about the augment and how it works. It is sort of disappointing. I don't have a lot of experience with the augment. I had to get it recently just for this video. Let's see, where is it at? Target fixation. So Tailwind augment basically each time an enemy gets hit with Tailwind damage, not just a gun. Because at first I was like, wait, maybe this will scale off of other things. It is just Tailwind. So you can't hover in the air and hit a bunch of enemies, with like a fast firing small damage gun, and then dive bomb for like 50,000 damage. It doesn't work that way. It has to be Tailwind damage. It increases our damage for Tailwind by 100%, and damage resets upon being on the ground for 2 seconds. Now, probably the nicest thing about this is that the reset being 2 seconds isn't that incredibly punishing. So let's see what it looks like. That's a wrong ability again. Let me go ahead and dive bomb. Alright, so we have 800% damage there. 1300%. So we can stack it up fairly quickly if they're grouped. So maybe a larva build would possibly be able to do something with this. I really don't think so, but as you can see, it's pretty easy if I just hop around all the time. And because I have less fall speed because of our passive, I'm able to keep this up very, very easily. So even if you run across the ground for a few split instances, you're still going to be fine. So like one Mississippi kind of thing. You're going to be fine. Just know that if you get knocked down, or if you fall down, or if you stay on the ground for too long, this is going to reset. Now, this does seem to scale infinitely. I've gotten it very, very high in testing. The only problem with that is how high is high enough so that it would matter. And against armored units, this answer is it has to be ridiculously high for it to matter. So you can see we're starting to do 680. And I know you might be thinking, well, wait a second, what about, if you get really high? It's still not going to be that much damage. So I'm at 6,400%, and we're doing 3k damage with a full kind of like bullet jumped up. Let's do a double jump. And I ran out of energy, so never mind. But yeah, it isn't going to be a lot of damage, even if you scale it as much as you can, really. So let me go ahead and do that test again, and then we'll come over here. Now, that being said, you will notice I don't have ability strength on right now. So this could be, double or double and a half as powerful pretty easily, but it requires an absolute ton of setup. And not only does it require a ton of setup, it requires a different playstyle where you have to stay off of the ground and you have to be aiming at enemies that are somewhat clustered so you can get the damage bonus. And not only that, but just the way the stats work out, it's going to be a little harder to mod for damage if you're also using this as a mobility skill. So if you're using this as a mobility skill and you want the really fast dash, you're going to lose range, which also means you're going to have a smaller radius when you dive bomb, which means you're not going to hit as many enemies, which means your augment isn't going to stack up as fast. So this all kind of leads into the fact that this skill is really bad at dealing damage. And honestly, there's a lot of ways they could fix it, like a lot of ways. But for right now, I would not recommend using this skill as a damaging skill. Possibly you might be able to eke something passable out once we get access to the Helminth abilities, but for right now, do not use it as a damaging ability. I would highly recommend you use it with maximum duration, and then you just use it as a mobility skill. This actually works pretty well as a mobility skill because one of our other augments ends up scaling our movement speed, and this basically causes us to be able to move very quickly inside with that ability, and then whenever we see a big room or a big chasm or we're outdoors, we can use our dash to cover bigger distances. So she ends up being pretty mobile in the end, just not necessarily from this ability in all situations. But as always, if I missed anything or misrepresented anything, let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.